Well, good morning and welcome to all of you. Welcome especially to any visitors who are here. We hope you'll feel at home with us, and we hope that you'll join in morning tea with us after the service. Today is a special day called the 13th day of Christmas. Have you ever heard of that? The reason you haven't heard of it is there's only 12, and the 12th day was yesterday. And these decorations, which were put up on Christmas Eve, are normally taken down on the 12th day. And so I said, hang on, can we just have them one more day so that I can talk about the 12th day of Christmas? And that's the theme. The 12th day is marked in the Christian Bible with the story of the wise men coming and visiting Jesus. So that's a theme of this whole service. And now I'm glad to welcome my wife Marion to the service and to invite her to read the story of the wise men. Thank you, Marion.
Morning. From the Christian Scriptures, the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 2. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd thy people Israel.' Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, 'Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage.' When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overcome with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road.
Well, I've chosen, when I was asked to take a service for today, I thought it was obvious to talk about the birth of Jesus and whether the star, all the different theories there are about what the Star of Bethlehem was. And I've got most of my resources from 3 Wikipedia articles about this subject. And they raise very definitely the question of whether the star that the wise men reported seeing, whether that was Halleys Comet or something else. And I would like to take you through a number of sightings of comets and what they all meant at the time, because it's absolutely, to me, a fascinating story. And the first, the first of the people who reported Halleys Comet, or one of them rather, not the very first, one of them was the Jewish historian Josephus. And he saw a comet, and so did thousands of others then, in AD 66. And the comet, according to some sources, and I think they might be biased, said the comet was a sign of warning, of God warning that he was about to destroy the city of Jerusalem And so there is a picture, a wood carving done in 1666, and it shows the city of Jerusalem with this threatening comet hanging over it. Whether that is exactly what happened or not, we don't know, but we do know that that definitely was the date, because it was seen by so many people that there was a great comet in AD 66. My second observer of Halleys Comet, if you could switch that on, Marion, thanks, is a group of embroiderers in the year 1066, and you may well recognise that. That is the Bayeux tapestry made by the Norman invaders when they invaded England. And they drew this tapestry 70 metres long to show their own armies in the fight, and it's full of horses and people dying and full of blood. But right in the middle of this tapestry is a star. If you can just see at the top centre of that piece of the star. And that, as we now know, was Halleys Comet. So a second very, very fateful day marked by the presence of Halleys Comet. Of course, they didn't know it was Halleys Comet at the time. And so that is a very concrete piece of evidence that there was a star seen at 1066, because that actual tapestry is still there on display in Normandy. Now, the third observer, was a painter who lived in 1301. He was an Italian, Giotto di Bondone, and in 1301 he saw a comet also. And he too becomes a part of history because he drew it. And so this is an eyewitness drawing of Halleys Comet. But the rest, and that's there just in the top of the story, there is the Halleys Comet, which he had seen 4 years before. But he has drawn this in a special context of the birth of Jesus. So he is the first person on record as saying the birth of Jesus was lit by a comet, and it looked something like this. Now, he had no idea that it was the same comet, but he did know what a comet looked like, and so he drew the picture of the wise men visiting Jesus and giving him these special gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And that fresco is part of history because it is still there on the wall of a chapel in Italy. So that's two artists who've actually documented the appearance and the time of this comet. So they are all pieces of history, those paintings. If we could move to the fourth observer, this was an astronomer. And the picture shows, it's rather a strange picture, but it's like a multiple exposure. And they all show the same comet, which he had seen a few years earlier. And they look really weird. And the reason that they look weird is because he has drawn each of them as they appeared to him, starting from the right. One of them has got the number 6 by that first comet on the right. And that shows the angle that the comet stood when he first saw it on that night. And there's a line goes down from it to the sun, and it shows that he knew that the comet was pointing straight towards the sun. Its tail was pointing away from the sun. He was the first person to observe that all comets have their tails pointing away from the sun. He didn't know why they did that. We do know that now, and that's because the tail of a comet is not like a jet stream coming out of a jet engine, and it's not like a rocket which creates its own tail. The tail is created by the sun. The warmth of the sun melts the ice in the comets hugely, and the surface of the comet explodes, and bits of rock and dust go flying out. And why do they go away from the sun? Well, there's also a stream of particles from the sun called the solar wind, and the solar wind blows all those tails away from the sun. And so those comets are not going the way you would think from the way they're pointing. They're going left. So that comet is travelling left, and each day it was tilting a little bit further as it went around the sun. So there's a real picture of a real event, which only an astronomer would have noticed. And many people must have seen that tail. Not many of them drew the conclusion that they all pointed to the sun like that. That was in 1531. The astronomer was Peter Appian in Germany. The next picture is also a German astronomer, Johannes Kepler, who lived in 1607. And these are not pictures of comets, these are pictures of his theory of the solar system. And before his time, several astronomers had said the sun is the centre of the universe, and the sun is the centre, of the solar system, and all the other planets orbit around it. But they couldn't work out what the exact time and space of those orbits were. And he was the first person to say the planets' orbits are not circles, they're ellipses. A circle has one centre, an ellipse has two focuses around which that is drawn, and the sun is at one of the focuses of the planet's orbit. And so he noticed he hadn't figured out how that could be. Isaac Newton figured out a few decades later, but it was based on his observation that the planets go round in ellipses. And if you look at the bottom picture, that shows a very stretched out ellipse. And ellipses, of course, come in all different shapes. Some are fat and some are almost round. If you had a body that was coming into the solar system from way out of the range of all the other planets, it would have a very long orbit like that. And he counted the wide bit is where the comet is going fastest. So the comet goes fastest as it's round the sun, and gradually gets slower and slower and slower, and that width of the picture marks the speed of the planets. Ironically, he also saw Halley's Comet, but he didn't realise it was a comet. He didn't realise that it too went around in his orbits. So he thought the planets all went in ellipses, but comets zipped straight through. Well, he was wrong. The comets also go in ellipses, but they are very, very long ones. And he had actually seen one of them doing it, but didn't put the bits together. The next observer was Edmund Halley, who saw a comet in 1682 in England. And that's his telescope, which Marion and I saw a few years ago in Greenwich on the edge of London. And he did what nobody else had done before. He noticed that lots of these comets came, the comets that had been sighted way back in history were a certain number of days between them. He noticed that Peter Appian's comet was 76 years before Kepler's comet, and Kepler's comet was 76 years before his. And he thought, aha, it's regular. They are going in an orbit. They are the same comet. And that's why it is called Halleys Comet. He was by no means the first to see it, but he was the first to do all the subtractions and figure they were the same one. And he not only figured that out, but he figured out the actual shape of the comet, the shape of the orbit of all the planets, all the comets, and by doing that, he was able to predict when the next one would come. It didn't come exactly 76 years later, but he calculated when it would come, and nobody called it Halleys Comet at the time because this was just a theory. Nobody had proved it was right, so his prediction was what did prove it right, and later on it did come back exactly when he said it would come. So at that point, 3 French astronomers congratulated him for being right after all those years, and that was when they started calling it Halleys Comet. It wasn't his until he proved it. The next, Halley could not predict all the comets for going ever backwards. He predicted it, he calculated just for 3 comets and for one yet to come. But all those other comets which had been seen by people, his predictions were not accurate enough to say which of those past sightings were the same comet, because he didn't have the exact days when they happened, and he couldn't. His comet was his prediction was only accurate back to the year 837, because in that year, Halley's Comet came very close to the Earth, and so much so that it distorted its orbit, and all the ones before it were slightly out of sync with what had happened afterwards. So he couldn't predict those. But the Chinese people could. And that's a record taken in China in 240 BC. And the Chinese astrologers had been, for several hundred years, even before that, and hundreds of years after, had been observing everything going on in the heavens, including comets, and they were the ones who actually enabled Halley's picture to be, all of Halley's calculations in principle were right, but the Chinese observations finalised them and said, yes, it confirmed all of those were the one comet. And they were not the only ones. The next slide, that, by the way, is in the British Museum, and so is this, I think. This is a Babylonian observation in 164 BC. Yes, and that comet, that's their explanation of what they saw on that very day. And so the picture of Halley's Comet didn't become clear until those ancient observations were added together with Halley's calculations. Now, if we could move to the next picture, that one is in the year 1910. And that is Halley's Comet, the first time that there was a photo taken of it. And this photo was in newspapers all around the world, and there were horror stories all around the world as well, because some astronomer observed that one of the gases coming out of Halley's Comet was arsenic. And he warned that people would have to, could be poisoned if they inhaled any of the tail of Halley's Comet. And it came so close to Earth that its tail actually did pass through the Earth. But what looks like a solid tail there is in fact particles of dust miles apart from each other. And the tail is actually hundreds of kilometres long, but it's very, very thin. So nobody was under any danger, but there were many people in Europe who were wearing gas masks when it happened, and selling special comet medicines. Now, that tallies in with a bit of my family history. A lot of these comet sightings tying with everything. My father was born 1 year before that comet went past, so I can feel a bit of a family connection with that. And if you go to the next one, thanks, Marion, that one shows the next appearance of Halley's Comet, and it was in 1986. And lots of people saw that. It was very faint. It was nowhere near as impressive as in 1910. Now, in the Northern Hemisphere, it was almost invisible to the naked eye. And the reason was it was the far side of the sun, so it was a very long way away from the Earth, at its closest to the sun. The time it was coming was predicted in the news and so on very accurately, and so I was one of many people who tried to go and see it, and I lived in Wellington at the time, and I went out to outside of Wellington to a field in the middle of the night where I could, about 10:30 at night, trying to see if I could see it. I could see a very, very faint picture of the tail, and so I got my camera out and tried to take a picture, and you couldn't see it. It's so pale. The only way you would have got it, I should have got it, would be to take a tripod and do about a 5-minute exposure of it. And that was how photos like this were taken. But the next picture, it was much more obliging though. The next picture shows photos of it were taken from spacecraft. And this is from a Soviet spaceship, and it showed a much closer up picture. And everybody since then had commented that Halley's Comet looks a bit like a peanut. And it looks like it's two balls joined together, doesn't it? And but that was what they saw it, and they were able to analyse what kind of materials are in it. They confirmed the impression that it was a dirty snowball. There was quite a lot of ice in it, but also there's more dust than ice, and frozen methane, frozen other gases. So that gave them a picture of what was in the planet, in the comet, and it also explained why the planet does not have the comet does not have a very long future, because those every one of those tails gets left behind and disperses, and there are two meteor showers that hit the Earth every year. Now, one in April, one in October, I think it is. I can't remember their names. But they are little bits of dust and grit and stuff. And when they hit the Earth's atmosphere, they burn up. They're going so fast that they burn up instantly, and you can see them. You can see dozens of them every night if you're looking at the right time of night. And those meteor showers, would you believe it, also were linked with Halleys Comet. They are the bits and pieces of Halley's past tales. And so they predict that it will not keep on going forever. Halleys Comet will one day, I think it was about 6 metres of depth of Halleys Comet was stripped away in one of its tails. Just imagine, a huge amount of rubble just being left behind. If you look back at all of those pictures of all those datings of Halleys Comet, an unbelievable thing about it is that every orbit was seen by somebody. There's not a single gap in those 76-year cycles, way back to 240 BC. Every one of them has been seen, and everyone now has an exact date to when it happened, thanks to the Halley, thanks to the Chinese and all the other ancient observers. And so now it becomes possible to say for absolute certain whether Jesus saw Halleys Comet, because we can put the dates on them. And if you look at this picture, could not have happened at the time of Jesus. The reason being that we know from Josephus that one of the comet visits to the world was in AD 66 when Jerusalem was destroyed. That a few years later, Jesus was not alive in AD 66 because he died in the year around about the year 35. His death date is not known precisely, but there is a 30-year margin for error. So no way was Jesus alive to see that comet. And if you go to the previous comet before that, it was 12 BC. And there was no way that Jesus was there at 12 BC. The exact birth date of Jesus is not known. It's only guessed from the fact that Matthew and Luke's Gospel both say that he was born during the reign of Herod the king. And Herod's death is known precisely, and it was 4 BC on our timing. So if Jesus was there in 4 BC, he could not have been there for Halleys Comet, which was there 8 years earlier in 12 BC. So it's absolutely certain that Jesus did not see Halleys Comet. But if you could move on now, thanks, Marion, to the next one. But so there isn't a real connection. Jesus never met the comet, but there is a connection in somebody else's mind, not Jesus. The connection is that in AD 66, Jesus certainly did not see it, but Matthew certainly did, because he was writing his gospel at that very time. And we know when Matthew's gospel is written, it's more than just a coincidence of time that Matthew could have seen the comet, but the first three gospels to be written all have that incident in mind. This is how one of the clues by which scholars date when those gospels were written. But Mark's gospel, which was the first to be written, has clear signs in it that it is anticipating the destruction of Jerusalem. Mark tells of people predicting a disaster, of Jesus predicting a disaster, but he doesn't record the disaster happening. So Mark is clearly before AD 66, but equally Matthew and Luke, who both copy large chunks of Mark, rewrite it to take the urgency out of it, and this is taken as evidence that they were written after Halleys Comet. So that picture then was hot debating topic in the time of Matthew. He would have seen it. Everybody else saw it. Some people predicted this was announcing the destruction of Jerusalem. Some people said it was announcing great things for the Emperor of Rome. And one of my favourite stories is the King of Armenia in AD 66. he saw the comet, and he was just starting out in his reign, and he was very full of self-importance. And so he said, this comet is a sign that I am going to be the great new king of Armenia. And he wanted to get the Roman Emperor Nero to agree with him. And so he sent a team of astrologers to Rome. And he went with them, I think, himself. And there you have this stream of astrologers going to Rome with their theory that this was their king being honoured. And Nero had no time for them whatsoever and told them to get lost. And so those astronomers, the report from Armenia says they went back to their own home by another way. Now that is an exact line from what happened in Matthew's Gospel. He also knew of a comet of kings going back, astrologers going back their own way. And the theory is that was the inspiration of the comet in Matthew's Gospel. That's where the Wikipedia article on the comet ends. It ends with this speculation that Matthew was writing about Halleys Comet, but he was projecting it back out of his own experience and in his own fantasy back to the birth of Jesus. Now, if we could move on to the next slide, Miriam. So that's next but one. I'm wondering what's going to happen on the next visit of Halleys Comet. I reckon that will be even more exciting than the last one, because now we can actually get spacecraft to land on the comet. And that's a picture of a spacecraft landing on a comet in only 4 years ago. So surely by 2061, I think it is, when this next comet comes, surely they will by then have figured out how to land a comet on it, land a spacecraft on it, and you'll see something like that. And the next picture shows an artist's impression of a spacecraft landing on a comet. What a amazing thing it will be for our children who will be alive to see TV pictures of it. And what would be even more exciting, and this I think will be a wow for any children who are interested in astronomy, if you could take the next picture, would be to actually walk on Halleys Comet. Now that's a picture of a man walking on Mars. And if any of you know this story, that's from it's a fiction, of course, and it's a picture from the film The Martian, but I put some stars in behind it to make it look like it's landing on Halleys Comet. But I reckon, so from looking overall at the story, I'd say from one point of view, you could say Matthew's story of the Star of Bethlehem is complete nonsense. He imagined it, he lied right, left and centre about it. But from another point of view, he was projecting his wishes onto this, but so all and astrology doesn't work, but all these other observations were made by astrologers with their own dreams. All the Chinese were not watching the comets all those years just for the sake of astronomy. They thought this was a guide. They were astrologers seeing guidance in it. So if Matthew sees guidance in it, and all those other people saw guidance, so can we. And we can say we are proud to have been here in a century when Halleys Comet visited. We are proud to tie some of our memories to it, and we hope that all the countries which took part in that drawing of the picture of the timing of the Halleys Comet, just imagine, every one of those countries is still in the news. The Babylonian observers are still there. There is still people in North Korea witnessing comets. There are still Chinese witnessing it. There are still people in Germany and in Russia and all those other countries that have taken part in the history. All those other countries are still one with us and can see some point of connection, factual or imaginary, with Halleys Comet. Now, for our meditation, I've taken one particular coincidence about Halleys Comet, the German writer Mark Twain, and he saw Halleys Comet. Halleys Comet arrived the very year that he was born, and when he was 76, he said he would like to think that he would get to see Halleys Comet departing as well. And He did. The comet, in fact, he died a day after the comet came apart, died of a heart attack. But when he was writing this wish down a year earlier, he said there were two interesting things happened in 1835. One is that I was born, and the other was that Halleys Comet came here. And God, who designed for two freaks to arrive at the same time, I hope he will arrange for them both to depart at the same time. And he got his wish. So I'd like to use that as a theme for our meditation. Think of the highlights of your life, the highlights of your birth, the highlight of your death, any good and bad highlights. Let us think about how our life would look from someone looking down from a comet. Notices today. I'd like to invite you to consider then these closing words, and they are part of the Desiderata, a long poem written by Max Ehrmann in Indiana in 1872. And some of these verses are particularly appropriate. Go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly. Listen to others, even the dull and ignorant. They too have their story. Keep interested in your own career, however humble. It is a real possession in the changing fortunes of time. Exercise caution in your business affairs, for the world is full of trickery, but let this not blind you to what virtue there is. Many persons strive for high ideals, and everywhere is full of heroism. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here, and whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore be at peace with God, whatever you conceive him to be, and whatever your labours and aspirations, in the noisy confusion of life, keep peace with your soul. With all its sham, drudgery and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world.